Part 2 is the longest part of Demons. I will say that it has 11 chapters because I include the appendix, which is supposed to be chapter 9 as part of the book. A bit of background on the appendix before we turn to an overview of Part 2. Demons was published serially in the newspapers, and Dostoevsky was always struggling to keep up with his schedule for publishing. No easy task. His publisher told him that the chapter would cause problems with the censors who exercise prior restraint on things published. There are racy scenes in that withdrawn chapter entitled At Tikhon's. Dostoevsky toned the scenes down, but the publishing was already happening. So he prepared to publish the book after it ran serially without the chapter and made some adjustments to the text to make up for the hole that was left in the text. The withdrawn chapter contains some of the key insights into Stravogin's heart and soul. And without that chapter, the character almost seems incomplete. Though, with imagination, one can probably arrive at the character that Dostoevsky draws. So there is every reason to include the withdrawn chapter in our consideration of the book, and most, if not all, scholars do so. Let us take a bird's eye view of Part 2, so that we have a map as we walk through the woods. This part concerns principally the advancing revolution in our one-horse town. It concerns the nature of socialism and the nature of revolution, how they complement one another and how they differ. The first 3 chapters of Part 2, Night, Night Continued, and The Duel, are about Stravogin's character and his relation to the revolutionary and the socialist movements, and also about his relation to the movements opposing socialism. Stravogin is a capacious character, and he gives birth to all of this. Next, we have the heart of Part 2, chapters 4 through 8, concerning principally Pyotr Stepanovich, our revolutionary. In this part, we see him rallying the socialists for revolutionary action and taming the liberals so they will have nothing to get in the way. This portion of the book proceeds from chapter 4, which is entitled All in Expectation, through Pyotr's discussion with Stravogin in chapter 8, called Ivan the Tsarevich, where Pyotr offers Stravogin the leadership role in the upcoming socialist revolution. Stravogin seems to decline. The last 3 chapters, if we include the appendix, contain much important action. Chapter 9 sees our romantic liberal, Stepan Tropinovich, arrested and perquisitioned to visit the governor. Then chapter 9b, so to speak, has Stravogin's visit to the bishop, named Tikhon. Lastly, chapter 10 concerns the morning of the big party or fete that will be celebrated by the people in the city, but also the scandal that seems to be developing. Every character seems to come back into that chapter. So there are some general threads that do not fit into this general framework, to be sure, but this is the big picture. Now, after discussing the appendix and our big picture, the rest of this video will concern the first 3 chapters of Part 2, the chapters that concern mainly Stravogin. Recall what we know about Stravogin in Part 1. He lived loosely and did many bad things, duels, nose pullings, ear bitings, until he gets brain fever. He goes abroad after that and seems to get involved in skirt chasing and comes back a somewhat melancholy man. Precisely why that is difficult to say. But this is the man who, near the end of Part 1, escorts the lame girl, his wife, out of the meeting with everyone there. He seems interested in humiliating himself in public as he owns his marriage to Marya Timofeevna. This is the man who was said not to look like he was wearing a mask by our narrator when he came back. He seems humbled and troubled. But again, it is difficult to know why. Our narrator says Stravogin seems to have the light of some new idea in his eye. I want to cut to the chase here. Stravogin has decided to reject his past and to transcend it somehow, and he is searching for a way to confess some unspeakable crime and to acknowledge his humiliating marriage to Marya, the lame girl. He is seeking absolution, and he is a changed man. Part 2 begins with night. It begins 8 days after Shatov's slap of Stravogin and the scandal that had to do with it. But the key to night begins in the third section, when Stravogin prepares to leave for the night and to go visiting old friends. As he prepares to leave, Pyotr Stepanovich comes in, and two things are apparent about Pyotr. First, he is responsible for everything that has happened in the town and all the rumors surrounding the events of the slap. Second, he comes to offer Stravogin something important, though he dissembles and hems and haws while making the offer. He offers Stravogin to kill Stravogin's wife, to kill Shatov, and to kill Mr. Gaganov, the offended son of the man whose nose Stravogin had pulled years ago. After meeting with Pyotr Stepanovich, Stravogin goes out to meetings around the town. The first two meetings bring up part of himself that belongs in his past, the parts that he is more or less rejecting in his humiliation. First, he visits Kirillov, who is going to ask to be the second in a proposed duel with Mr. Gaganov. That is, he was challenged Stravogin to that duel. Kirillov is one of the famous characters in the book, and we will dedicate a video to him soon. Kirillov is a nihilist. He thinks that all meaning comes from the human will alone. Once people realize that all meaning comes from our wills, they will become like gods themselves. But this means that love of life cannot limit the actions of our will. So the logical consequence is that one must prove one's freedom of will through committing suicide, through renouncing the exterior love of life. Then ye shall be like gods. Kirillov, who had known Stravogin when they both lived in Petersburg, had gotten from Stravogin his atheism and his view that the human will must triumph. Then Stravogin visits Shatov, another character whom we will dedicate an upcoming video to. Shatov seems to be a Slavophile, a lover of the blood and soil of Russia. But he, like Kirillov, is, at this time, no believer in God. The rightness or wrongness of an action for Shatov is determined by the religion and faith of a land. But this faith is not grounded in anything transcendent or above the people. Shatov believes in a morality that comes from faith, but that does not have faith in God. It is not clear that Shatov will stop at this position. He even predicts that he will again someday believe in God. And this too is an aspect of Stravogin's character. Shatov is a spiritual striver, possessing a thirst for righteousness. But it is barren without a genuine and even simple faith animating it. The Russian people without its orthodoxy cannot be saved. Stravogin was an instrument for Shatov breaking with the socialists abroad, leaving his radical past and helping him embrace the messianic idea of the Russians as a God-fearing people destined to rule the world. But thinking God is necessary is not the same as thinking God is true. Shatov is ready to act to save Russia, it seems, and Stravogin is not. Stravogin is not interested in a political, spiritual solution to the problems that plague him or his country. We see from these two visits that Stravogin's atheism goes in two directions, toward Kirillov's nihilism and towards Shatov's patriotism. Kirilov and Shatov went to America together to see what life was like there. They were friends. And Stravogin saved them, in a sense, by giving them money to come home from America. We need to investigate these things in their own videos. But here we see what this means about Stravogin. His ultimate stance, at least before he has returned home, points in these directions. They may also point in the direction of Pyotr Stepanovich and how he takes them. Thus ends Night, the first chapter of the second part. The second chapter, Night Continued, contains in large part the confrontation with Marya and Stravogin. This chapter contains 4 sections. First, Stravogin meets Fedka the convict on the bridge as he is going to meet Marya. Second, Stravogin runs into Maria's brother, Lebyadkin. Third, and most crucially, he talks long and hard with Maria. And fourth, he returns home and meets Fedka again on the bridge. We cannot talk about everything here. Let it suffice to say that Maria Timofeevna comes across as a holy fool, simple-minded and unable to distinguish right from wrong or reality from dreams. She thinks God inhabits the world, that the mother of God is the great mother of the damp earth, who brings joy to people when they water the earth with tears a foot deep. She connects religion and civil society in a way no other character in the book does. One could think of it like this. He realizes what Shatov thinks is needed. A love of the soil and a love of God are mingled in Maria's mind. Stravogin seems to offer Maria a life with him, but a life in Switzerland, not in Russia, a life away from her home soil, and hence away from her gods. And she rejects him. She calls him an impostor, a false savior, it seems. She sees him as a worm that has entered her heart. Stravogin has a knife along, and she sees it. She says she is not scared of his knife, because some mysterious him will protect her. She knows that Stravogin has thoughts of killing her, but here he refrains. He leaves in a huff, while she shouts out calling him Grishka Orpatov, anathema, the last words of section 3, and that fellow was an impostor. When Stravogin leaves, he throws all his money at Fedka the convict in section 4. He never tells Fedka that he wants Maria dead, but that is how Fedka interprets the fact that Stravogin throws him 1,500 rubles. And that is not an unreasonable interpretation. Stravogin throws himself into a duel where he refuses to take shots at Mr. Gaganov. The sequence of chapters ends with a short confrontation between Stravogin and Daria, Shatov's sister, in Part 2, Chapter 3, Section 4. Daria seems to think that Stravogin is ruining himself and that he is taking actions that he will never forgive himself for. He seems haunted by ghosts and devils, and he tells Daria that the 1,500 that he threw at Fedka had happened. She says that she will be the last to desert him, that she will become his sister of mercy or a sick nurse or a book hawker and sell gospels, but that she will certainly be the last ever to leave him. This is a survey that we have done of Stravogin. His anguish is apparent, but not equally apparent to everyone. Pyotr Stepanovich thinks Stravogin is just a good-time rock and roller who wants out of his marriage, and maybe he does. But he seems to be caught between several worlds, between kindness and cruelty, between self-absorption and politics, between a desire for righteousness and a recognition that he has fallen short. And this plays out as the novel progresses. We need now to survey some of the other main characters, starting with Shatov, whose significance to the novel as a whole is captured in one fact. He is the man that the revolutionary nihilists murder.